Yeah, well, we were just poking along here about 10 minutes ago. It looked like it was actually going to be kind of a slow day. And then everything blew up here, and then we...
Live from the Southern Command in sunny South Florida, it's Open Line Friday!
Yeah, and I still don't know what to make of this. There's something that smells about this still, and I can't put my fingers on it, but we're going to have to get into it. Anyway, welcome to Open Line Friday. Whatever you want to talk about, it's fine and dandy, folks. That's the rule. That's not the way it is Monday through Thursday. If you don't talk about what you said you're going to talk about, it's sayonara. We do it nicely, but it's still sayonara. But on Friday, hardly any restrictions. Telephone number 800-282-2882 and the email address lrushbo@eibnet.com. I was sitting here, it was literally 15 minutes ago, and I was going through the final assembly stages of the program and the show prep today, and this stack and this stack, and I'm going through the stacks. You know what? There isn't anything, I don't know what the heck I would lead with today. I've literally no idea what would be the first thing that would come out of my mouth today. There's 2 or 3 contenders, but there's nothing really stands out. And then my iPhone rang. I looked at it, and I had an iMessage over this. Okay, so I looked at that, and it said, "There goes Carson." Oh no! What now? So I went to the internet, nothing. I went to email, nothing. So what is it? There goes Carson. So I wrote back. What are you talking about? What have I missed? And before I had a chance to get a reply, my Drudge page reloaded, and it says, Carson admits fabricating West Point scholarship. Oh, no. What in the name of Sam Hill is this? So I clicked on the link, and it's a Politico story here. And the first impression, and I'm telling you this is key, If you are unfamiliar with Carson and his book, and if you're not up to speed with the day-to-day details of the Carson campaign, the headline here: Ben Carson admits fabricating West Point scholarship. What you end up after reading the headline, the subhead, is that Ben Carson must have written a book in which he says that he was granted a scholarship to West Point and attended. And now we learn the whole thing's not true. And so at first glance, I'm like, gosh, he made up the fact that he went to West Point? How in the world does all this time go by? And the people at West Point, he's got it in his book that he attended West Point. How come nobody up to now has said, no, he didn't? But that's not what the allegation is. You've got to read further. And let's just do that here. Because the first impressions a lot of people are going to make here, or going to have, is that Carson has really made up, totally fabricated a story that has no element of truth in it, which is exactly what the drive-bys want. There's also a key factor here in the campaign is who admitted this. But let's just take it as we got it. Politico, Ben Carson admits fabricating West Point scholarship. Okay. Ben Carson's campaign on Friday admitted, in response to an inquiry from Politico, that a central point in his inspirational personal story was fabricated. His application and acceptance into the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. The academy has occupied a central place in Carson's tale for years, it says here. Well, I know, if it's as bad as it looks, all is not lost. At least he could work at NBC. They let you make things up there. In fact, in some places they promote you for making things up like that. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here. Let me go back here to the headline: Carson admits fabricating West Point scholarship. By the way, let me just take a survey. No wrong answer. Somebody, do you have any idea that Carson had a scholarship or has asserted you didn't know that West Point was part of his life? Because you haven't read the book. What about you? Did you know that West Point was a part of what? Okay. You didn't. So 3 people here had no knowledge of the West Point aspect of the Carson story. It's in his book, but that just means that the people here haven't read. The survey doesn't mean anything here. It's just anecdotal. Ben Carson's campaign admitted in response to an inquiry from Politico that a central point in his inspirational story was made up. His application and acceptance to the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. The Academy's occupied a central place in Carson's tale for years, according to a story in Carson's book, Gifted Hands. The then 17-year-old was introduced in 1969 to General William Westmoreland, who had just ended his command of U.S. forces in Vietnam, and the two dined together. That meeting, according to Carson's telling, was followed by a full scholarship to the military academy. West Point, however, has no record of Carson applying, much less being extended admission. Teresa Brinkerhoff, spokeswoman for the Academy, said in 1969, those who would have completed the entire process would have received their acceptance letters from the Army Adjutant General. If he chose to pursue the application process, then we would have records indicating such. But she said that West Point has no records that indicate Carson even began the application process. When presented with this evidence, Carson's campaign conceded the story was false. Now, you know what started all of this. There are these stories in his book about how he used to be violent and filled with rage, but that he overcame it. He used to bully people, so CNN and others in the drive-by have been out there trying to find these people that Carson says he beat up or bullied or mistreated, and they can't find anybody. What they're basically trying to do is establish that Carson's making things up, building his resume, building his character, expanding his personality. Well, no, the book Gifted Hands, it's been out for quite a while. It's not the movie was made of this many, many, many years ago. When presented with the evidence, Carson's campaign conceded the story was false. Campaign manager Barry Bennett, quote, in an email to Politico, said, Dr. Carson was the top ROTC student in the city of Detroit. In that role, he was invited to meet General Westmoreland. He believes it was at a banquet. He can't remember with specificity their brief conversation, but it centered around Dr. Carson's performance as ROTC city executive officer. He was introduced, campaign spokesman Barry Bennett continuing here, he was introduced to folks from West Point by his ROTC supervisors. They told him they could help him get an appointment to West Point based on his grades and performance in ROTC. He considered it, but in the end did not seek admission. This admission, back to the Politico now, this admission comes as serious questions about other points of fact in Carson's personal narrative are questioned, including the seminal episode in which he claimed to have attempted to stab a close friend. Similarly, details have emerged that cast doubt on the nature of Carson's encounter with one of the most prominent military men of that era, back now to Westmoreland. The West Point spokeswoman said that it is certainly possible that Carson talked with Westmoreland, and perhaps the general even encouraged him to apply to West Point. However, she said the general would have explained the benefits of a West Point education without guaranteeing him entry. An application to West Point begins with a nomination by a member of Congress or another prominent government or military official in the state that you live in. After that, a rigorous vetting process begins. If offered admission, all costs are covered. Indeed, there are no full scholarships. There's no such thing. In his popular book, Gifted Hands, Carson says he excelled in his ROTC program at Detroit Southwestern High School, earning the respect of his superiors. Just a couple years after anger problems led him to try to murder a friend, he attained the rank of second lieutenant by his senior year of high school and became the student leader of the city's ROTC programs. In May of his senior year, he was chosen to march in the city's Memorial Day parade. He wrote that he felt so proud, my chest bursting with ribbons and braids of every kind. To make it more wonderful, we had important visitors that day. 2 soldiers who had won the Congressional Medal of Honor in Vietnam were present, but more exciting to me, General William Westmoreland, very prominent in the Vietnam War, attended with an impressive entourage. Afterward, Sergeant Hunt, his high school ROTC director, introduced me to General Westmoreland. I had dinner with him and the Congressional Medal winners, and later I was offered a full scholarship to West Point. But according to records of Westmoreland's schedule that were provided by the U.S. Army, the general did not visit Detroit around Memorial Day, 1969, nor did the general have dinner with Carson. In fact, the general's records suggest he was in Washington that day and played tennis at 6:45 p.m. There are, however, several reports of an event similar to the one Carson described in February that year. Then, Westmoreland was the featured guest at a 1,500-person banquet to celebrate Medal of Honor winner Dwight Johnson. The event drew prominent guests, including the governor at the time, the mayor of Detroit, the president of Ford Motor Company, and 9 previous Medal of Honor recipients, according to an AP account of the event. Carson, a leader of the city's ROTC program at the time, may have been among the invited guests at the $10 a plate dinner. Carson's later retelling of the events in this period of his life downplays his meeting with Westmoreland, and that event's linked to a West Point acceptance. In his January 2015 book, Have You a Brain?, which is a book geared toward teenagers, Carson again recalls his rapid rise through his high school's ROTC program to become the top student officer in the city. And he wrote in his recent book, that position allowed me the chance to meet 4-star General William Westmoreland, who had commanded all American forces Vietnam before being promoted to the Army Chief of Staff at the Pentagon in Washington. I also represented the junior ROTC at a dinner for Congressional Medal of Honor winners, marched at the front of Detroit's Memorial Day Parade as head of an ROTC contingent, and was offered a full scholarship at West Point. Now, Carson said he turned down the offer of admission because he knew he wanted to be a doctor, and attending West Point would have required 4 years of military service after graduation. Cecil Murphy, who ghost wrote Gifted Hands, told Politico that his memory of Carson's exchange with Westmoreland was hazy. My gut response is that it was not a private meeting, but there were others there. The general took a liking to Ben and opened doors. So, Carson never said he went to West Point. This story wants to make you think that. It's very cleverly done. I'm just zeroing in here on what I'm not trying to downplay what did happen. But there's also some exaggeration going on. Actually, it's an attempt to imply, the way it's written, they want you to believe that Carson said he got a full scholarship, he went to West Point, and none of that was true. And he never went to West Point, never said that he went to West Point. The contention is that he met Westmoreland. Westmoreland offered him a 4-year scholarship at West Point, which there are none. So the media is convinced they found Carson out to be here in a big, big lie. And not a big, big exaggeration, but a big, big lie. Anyway, that's that, and that's what blew up here right before the program started. If not for this, it was going to be, well, nothing's ever humdrum here. But by the standards of the last 2 or 3 days, it was not going to be as rocking and rolling. But, of course, that's out the window now. So.